BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. First, I would like to give it a shout out to Stefan Nyberg, who saw a recent post that I had made where I shared a Zodiac Killer Q&A session that I had done in 2020, and he proposed the idea for a future episode about doing an updated Zodiac Killer Q&A session. So welcome to this episode here. But you'll see from the title that this is also a true crime talk radio episode. And this is something that I started back in 2019, actually. The first episode was called Serial Killer Talk Radio, and there was not an ounce of thought put into that. I had just been following several different true crime podcasts, and I did a general discussion about serial killers. And in 2021, I released an episode called True Crime Talk Radio, and it turned into a regular segment on the Tuesday show, back when I had a Tuesday show. But I found that it was a concept that was a little bit difficult for some people to grasp, because we have lots of types of commentary out there, and there's lots of talk radio about politics or sports, or even the people who do the podcasts and live streams about relationships, because they can talk about anything related to politics or sports or relationships, and they can go between ideas very differently. In the true crime world, I found that it definitely is better to start with one topic and then move to a different one. There requires a little bit more organization, like beginning with one case and then maybe talking about some things more generally, but there really needs to be a central focus. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this episode. I'll start responding to some of your Zodiac Killer questions and comments, and then I will talk about some other true crime subjects at the end. And I do a lot of that on the Zodiac Monday episode. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. And if you want to follow along with that mystery, I invite you to hit the like button and subscribe. I also do a segment every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper, Ripper Wednesday. And you guys have made some great requested topics for that show as well. And really, I'm trying to get to more of your requests. And as you hear, this is one that was requested by one of the listeners. Stefan actually shared this in one of the Facebook groups. He thought that it would be a good idea to do an updated Q&A session. And he's absolutely right, because in 2020, when I shared the link to the old episode, the 340 cipher hadn't even been solved yet. The Zodiac Killer's second confirmed cipher. A lot has changed. Also, the Bates Had to Die letters hadn't made the news for being labeled as a hoax, although a lot of people dispute that finding. But yes, the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Some people believe that the Zodiac Killer began committing crimes before that. Other people believe that the crimes went on well after 1969. But that is all subject to interpretations of the evidence. There are definitely confirmed kills that were made by the Zodiac Killer, and then there are some larger theories out there. So I would like to go to the most recent Zodiac Killer news report and look at some of your questions and comments. The first one is about the Zodiac Killer's final confirmed victim, Paul Stine, and somebody had shared this theory that they thought that Paul Stine was the Zodiac Killer, and that he had faked his own death by murdering a look-alike, or a man that resembled his appearance. And the comment comes to us from Big Bad Bro Chimichanga Taco. Nice name, by the way, dude. As far as Paul Stine goes, his family identified the body. The problem with identifying people in the Jack the Ripper mystery is the pool of disturbed people in Whitechapel is plentiful. If the records are limited, the streets were poorly lit, and people typically wore darker clothing outside. Investigative techniques were very inconsistent and limited, among a ton of other issues. Good commentary, Ned. Well, thank you there, Big Bad Bro. And the reason why he's talking about Jack the Ripper is I shared something on Zodiac Monday about how there is the same theory in the Stein murder that is with Jack the Ripper's final victim, Mary Kelly, that the final victim was the killer, and she faked her own death, and Mary Kelly was actually Jack the Ripper. And I am not making that up. I read off that theory on Ripper Wednesday once, but Paul Stein's family identified the body. Absolutely. Absolutely. But here's something, though, that I meant to say on Zodiac Monday. Paul Stein's wallet was stolen. Why on earth would you fake your own death and then steal your own wallet or take your own wallet with you? I mean, wouldn't it make sense to take the wallet of the lookalike so you could continue living under his identity? And I mean, okay, I mean, I'm sure anyone who actually supports that theory, and there are probably 3 people in the entire world who would actually be convinced of a ridiculous theory like that, they would be like, oh yeah, well, yeah, he did that. He just took his wallet because he felt like it. No, I mean, that's just something that I think would be absolutely inconsistent with Paul Stein faking his own death. I don't think that that happened. And we do get some far-out true crime theories, and with the Zodiac Killer mystery, I've been following that one longer than Jack the Ripper, so I've noticed that the more extreme theories are definitely plentiful in the Zodiac case, and I think it's because of the geography of America. So very easily someone could connect the Zodiac to, say, Massachusetts, the way that Gareth Penn did, or they could start some type of Zodiac Killer connection to Texas with the Texarkana Moonlight murders. And I mean, I'm just beginning to get under the surface with Jack the Ripper. However, I do think that there are going to be lots of theories that are rather similar. Already, I'm shocked how many crimes have been committed by, or how many crimes have been attributed to Jack the Ripper in some of these theories. But I would like to get back to some of your Zodiac Killer questions and comments. The next one comes to us from Professor Japanese 007, who says, Gary Post could be the Zodiac, and Jack the Ripper could have played Santa. Ah, yes, of course, talking about the Casebreakers suspect Gary Francis Post, who made somewhat of a media firestorm in 2021. Now, the big thing that was supposed to have been shared is that Dale Julin, who's associated with the Casebreakers, was writing a book called Catching Zodiac, and that was when he was supposed to reveal all of these solutions to the ciphers, because the most famous one of their biggest pieces of evidence had not been revealed, and they said that if you removed the letters of Gary Francis Post's name from one of the ciphers, then it would reveal a different message. Like if you take out the G and the A and the R and the Y, it would reveal a different message. But that wasn't going to be revealed until the book came out. And as far as I know, that book is not out yet. I mean, so I don't know what's going on. It was supposed to be out last year, but it's already 2023. And the other thing that's supposed to be shared in that book is the solutions to the greeting card artwork, because Dale Julin was someone who believed that there are very, very large pieces of text that can be found in the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card, in the Peek Through the Pines card, and the 13 Hole Punch card. That, like, actual paragraphs of text. And you would be able, there's like an entire story that is written out. And again, I don't know how he does that, and he said he was going to reveal that in his book, but that has not been shared yet, though. Professor Japanese, thank you for the comment. This one comes to us from Putler Loves Trumpovich, who says something about the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, Arthur Lee Allen. And he says, Arthur Lee Allen has been cleared by DNA. All of the nonsense that tries to make that disappear is just that, nonsense. See, I'm actually going to disagree with you. Putler, I've said very clearly that I thought Arthur Lee Allen was not the Zodiac Killer. I even put Arthur Lee Allen in the debunking series of videos that I did, where I said that I didn't think that he was even a strong suspect. I gave him a 5 out of 10 on the suspect ratings, to be honest. I mean, and to be very clear, I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac Killer, and it was just him, and a lot of the observations that were shared in Graysmith's book and the Fincher film turned out to be correct. But also, As of now, I don't think he was the Zodiac. I think that he was more or less just the wrong target. And it's not only Graysmith who thought that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac. Arthur Lee Allen was indeed the prime suspect of law enforcement. But do they have DNA? Was Arthur Lee Allen actually cleared because of DNA? I don't think so. Any Zodiac killer suspect, because over the last, I guess 12 months, you'd say, I think that most people are coming to the consensus that they do not definitively have the Zodiac Killer's DNA. And I mean, yes, I've had conversations with people about this, particularly Mike Rodelli, and he actually authored an episode for this channel called Do They Have the Zodiac Killer's DNA? And he just provides a very convincing case on no, they do not. They found touch DNA from a stamp from one of the Zodiac Killer correspondences, and it's just not completely certain that that's from the killer. It's from the outside of the stamp. And touch DNA, not saliva DNA. So this whole thing about, well, somebody was licking the stamps, it has to be from them. Firstly, they could have just had somebody else lick the stamps for them or lick the envelope for them. But no, I do not believe that they can say with certainty that that's the Zodiac's DNA. And also, Tom Voigt released an update on that several months ago, again, probably about a year ago, saying that the first full profile of DNA from Zodiac letters had been created. However, the bad news was that it was someone who could not have been the Zodiac Killer. Now, I don't necessarily know what that means, but that's what was shared by Tom Voigt. But more or less, they did not have any way of linking that person to the mystery. And I mean, I'm not even going to speculate in any further direction, but that tells me that they simply do not have the killer's DNA, and it's not like they just have the Zodiac Killer's DNA in some sample, and they're just waiting for the right suspect to match this person to. Maybe they thought they did back in the early 2000s when ABC did the Primetime Live special, which you can watch here on YouTube for free, but I don't think they do. Next comment comes to us from Prepper State, who also has something about Arthur Lee Allen, saying, Ned, I'm not sure I understood your point about the Zodiac Killer videotape that you talked about. You do know that there is certainly a Zodiac Killer videotape where Arthur Lee Allen does moon the camera. I think the Seawater family put out the tape on their channel. It's a VHS tape that was recorded with the news program about the Zodiac, and he did some talking to Mrs. Seawater, and the picture of him at the end is where he was mooning the camera. Now, somebody left a comment on a different channel. I think it was I was responding to some questions and comments from one of the documentaries that was on Bad Things True Crime, and somebody was talking about this video of Arthur Lee Allen mooning the camera on a VHS tape, and I thought that it wasn't real. I thought that person was making it up, and no, I hadn't watched that on the Seawaters channel, and Tom Voigt actually responded to Prepper State by saying, yes, that's a real video, but it was not uploaded onto the Seawaters YouTube channel, and they've uploaded several videos because they knew Arthur Lee Allen personally. Dave and Connie Seawater have claimed that prior to Arthur Lee Allen's death, he did indeed confess to them that he was the Zodiac Killer. It's referred to as a deathbed confession. However, it was done again about a month prior to his death, and some people are taking exception, saying that's not really a deathbed confession if he is saying it that soon before his death. Well, that doesn't faze me one way or the other. I mean, they claim that that's what happened. And, I mean, I don't want to say that I think they're making it up, so I won't, and I'll just leave it at that. Next question comes to us from ThenZI, who has a question about the Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, and the desktop poem that was discovered in the winter of that year, or I should say, in December of 1966, they discovered a poem that was written on a desktop in Riverside, California that says, sick of living, unwilling to die, and it talks about some story about a girl spilling blood all over her dress. Oh well, it was red anyway. And then ZI says, why is the Zodiac's writing on the desk? And there's a smiley face attached to that. And I think the implication is that, okay, well, of course, that's the Zodiac Killer's handwriting. It looks very similar, but I do not believe that that was the Zodiac Killer's handwriting. I just think that that is someone who had somewhat similar handwriting, similar but not identical, and that's the end of it. I don't see an ounce of Zodiac material in that, in that Sick of Living, Unwilling to Die poem, I also do not see any direct connection to Cheri Jo Bates, and furthermore, it says, she won't die this time, someone will find her, just wait until next time. But that poem was discovered after the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, and Cheri Jo was already dead at the time. But we have some other comments about suspects in the murder of Cheri Jo Bates. One comes to us from Kevin Bowen, who says, suspect Bob Barnett didn't match any of the evidence. Cheri Jo Bates was almost the same age as Donna Frizzley. I presume both had a parent who worked at Edwards Air Force Base. Was that a coincidence? Could be, but I suspect it isn't. Now, Bob Barnett is an alias that has been attributed to a former lover of Cheri Jo Bates. I'm using that word because their relationship seems rather uncertain. Like they were together and then they were apart, but it's possible that she actually was seeing him casually when the crime took place. So I really don't want to speculate about any of the details involving their relationship. So with the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, Bob Barnett became the prime suspect, and he was allegedly exonerated because of DNA evidence again. Now, the Citizen Detective podcast challenged that, saying maybe that's also an incorrect finding. I mean, everything makes sense about Bob Barnett being the killer of Cheri Jo Bates. I mean, the ex-boyfriend, right? I mean, but there are a few things that don't make sense. Why would her car have been tampered with? Why would somebody have to go through to those measures to try and bring Cheri Jo to the alleyway? This just didn't seem like the activities of an ex-boyfriend. That sounded like someone who was stalking her. But allegedly there was a hair that was found on Cheri Jo's body in her blood that did not belong to her. So that was tested with Bob Barnett's DNA and it didn't match. So most likely, well, let's just say he's not the source of it. And I mean, there could have been some involvement, or maybe not. As of now, he's innocent until proven guilty. But I also talked about a new suspect in the murder of Cheri Jo Bates named William Suff, and maybe he's not the newest suspect in the world. I first learned about him from Drew Gray, who shared an article that had been posted on ZodiacCiphers.com about William Suff as a Bates murder suspect. William Suff was a serial killer who was known as the Riverside Killer as well as the Lake Elsinore Killer. And he murdered over 20 women, and perhaps he murdered 32 women. They were talking about that on the channel Unsolved No More. And we have a comment from Ruined Roast who says, William Suff looks like a good suspect for the Bates murder. His young age would explain the fact why Bates was able to struggle against her killer, unless he was already ruled out. William Suff would have been 16 years old at the time of the Bates murder. And there's no age to become a killer, right? Somebody wrote that out once when they were talking about a 15-year-old suspect in the Cheri Jo Bates murder. And that was actually the Zodiac Killer suspect, Louis Myers, when I was corresponding with his nephew. In the comment section here on YouTube, he said, yeah, Louis Myers was my uncle. And Louis Myers actually named his daughter Cheri, C-H-E-R-I, spelled it the same way. And I was like, now, wait a second. Louis Myers would have only been 15 years old at the time of the Bates murder. And his nephew said, there's no age to be a killer, man. And I was like, all right, I mean, I do agree with that. But with William Suff, the reason why he is perhaps a strong suspect in the Bates murder, unless there's some type of forensic evidence that we don't know about in the general public, is that he targeted women, he targeted lone females, and quite different than the Zodiac killings. He also did something that was mentioned in the Riverside Confession letter that came in November of 1966 when he said that the killer, or the person writing the confession letter, said that he was going to cut off the lady parts of the victims and deposit them for the whole city to see. Well, that's exactly what William Suff did with his victims. He cut off their breasts, their lady parts, and he posed the bodies of the victims because he wanted people to see them in a certain way. Now, William Suff was stationed in Texas in 1969 with the military, so no, he's not the Zodiac Killer. I mean, the bulk of Zodiac activity, he would have been out of the state of California, and most likely, he almost certainly was not the Zodiac. But he then goes to jail in 1974 for the murder of his own daughter. He punched her in the stomach. She was 2 months old, and her liver ruptured. And then he spent 10 years in jail, and then he got out in the 1980s and went on to become a serial killer, committing even more murders and terrible, terrible story. But that's already getting into some of the realm of true crime talk, where I would be going through some of the other cases. And I would like to talk about something that you guys have really responded to, and I'm glad you responded to, because at the end of the Zodiac Monday episode that I did most recently, I played a clip of the Howard Stern show where somebody was calling in claiming that he was a serial killer. He said that his name was Clay. This was in 1997. He said that he had murdered around or over a dozen women in the Louisiana area. And again, he's just giving the name Clay. And a lot of people had heard this in the past. And I mean, there's just some very, very insightful responses. But, I mean, the first one comes to us from Barry Lauber, who says, "It's difficult to say if Clay was legit or not, as anyone could have pulled off that call as a prank. I lean toward it being a prank, but it's impossible to know for sure." Now, if you do listen to this, you can hear it all on the Zodiac Killer news report from May 1st of 2023, but if it is a prank call, it's actually somewhat of a well-composed prank call. I mean, someone put a lot of thought into it, but people can do things like that. My major point in sharing that with you was, okay, this guy calls the Howard Stern show. He says that he's a serial killer, that he murdered around 12 women, committing most of the murders with a hammer, like blunt force trauma. And some people were thinking that he is the Storyville Slayer, a real serial killer who has never been identified from Louisiana. And was it a prank call or was it a legitimate call? I mean, that's all uncertain, but my reason for sharing it was I absolutely believe that that person was not the Storyville Slayer. The Storyville Slayer committed crimes primarily by strangulation, and in the call that was shared on the Howard Stern show, he said that he only committed one murder by strangulation. But believe it or not, there actually is a very large multiple killers theory in the Storyville Slayer case. However, those types of theories exist in all types of cases. For example, the Zodiac Killer. How about that? How many people have multiple killers in the Zodiac mystery, or the Long Island serial killer? Which it makes a little bit more sense that there were two killers in the Long Island serial killer case. But in all reality, I mean, that's one, and the Zodiac case as well. I mean, as of now, I say one perpetrator for both of those. Classic Chevy Cat, also known as Cat Chevy, says, "Thank you, Ned, for talking about my book. The title of my novel is Vistoria Road. It's not for distribution. I'll give you one happily. I look forward to reading your book, Classic Chevy Cat, Vistoria Road." And I had thought that the title of her book was going to be called Level 22, but she says, "You can use Level 22. I think is a great title. Maybe for something in the future." Classic Chevy Cat has a novel coming out about the Zodiac Killer, but she has also said something about the possible Storyville Slayer call from Clay. "Clay has always intrigued me. Chilling, I don't think it was a prank. Great show. And let me tell you why I feel that Clay was real. Usually I don't trust anyone or anything. There is honestly just a guessing game by everyone. If he was truthful or a well-thought-out prank, in other words, unless someone comes forward, there's a 50-50 chance either way. The only reason I side with it being real is simply guts. A gut feeling, that means I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was a prank. Not at all. When I first heard him, the hair stood up on my arms." And another reason why I thought that was possibly not a real call is that Howard Stern asked this guy very clearly, "Were you abused as a child? Were you abused by your mother? I mean, you're saying you're a serial killer who's targeting women. Were you abused?" And he says, "No, not at all." And I was like, that is not typical with serial killers. Almost always there is some type of abuse that happens with serial killers, that they are abused. And it can also be done by lack of bonding. I mean, lack of bonding and exposure to morbidity can drive people to become serial killers. But we have one from David Cawley who says, "I think it's possible that the caller didn't want to admit to abuse, which I think I've come across from psychopaths and serial killers at some point, but can't remember a specific example. I think they only tend to admit to a weakness when it seems like it might help them in their legal defense. Absolutely everything a psychopath says has to be weighed against the question, how does this give them an advantage?" No, that's a very good point. If someone had been abused and they were indeed a psychopath, maybe they wouldn't want to share those details to the world because it would make them look weak. Mystery Junkie also has a comment about the Storyville Slayer, or Clay the serial killer. Howard Stern did good with questions, trying to get hints about the killer's location and appearance. I think the killer was legitimate because he kept correcting Howard when he got something wrong. Alright, so what's happening is, in case you didn't hear that, is that he's telling this story, but then he's always like really trying to stick to a narrative. He's talking about, I wanted to send in clues and I wanted to people to figure it out, and then Howard Stern says something like, "Oh yeah, he wanted to leave like some type of clue or signature," and then the guy says, "I didn't actually send them. I wanted to, but I didn't send them." So he's sticking to a very strong narrative. Like he has definitely worked it out in his mind. If it is a prank, as I said, I mean, people can prepare a story, but if it is real, then I mean that's definitely stands out. But I would like to go to the next comment here that comes to us from Sean Ball, also about Clay the serial killer. I always look forward to starting off my week with the Zodiac reports. I had listened to the Clay the serial killer call a few times, but this was the first time I listened with the Zodiac being the overall context. I found it interesting that Clay the serial killer shared several similarities with the Zodiac. Number one, they took inspiration directly from a comic book. Yeah, Clay the serial killer said that he learned about something like leaving a signature. He wanted to cut off the thumbs of his victims, dip them in paint, and make thumbprints on paper and mail it in. He said he got it from a comic book. Number two, Clay wanted to contact the media and law enforcement. I mean, that's what we said about writing in the letters and leaving clues. Number three, wanted to have a calling card or mark. He said he wanted to create a signature, and he wants to stay alive for the next Batman movie. That's how the clip ended that I shared on Zodiac Monday. There's actually about 4 more minutes of dialogue, but I only put about 7 minutes into the Zodiac news report. And number five, he made this call to Howard Stern, which in itself is taunting brazen, rather like the 2 calls we know for sure the Zodiac did. Now, this was made in 1997, and I I mean, it's possible that this guy was familiar with the Zodiac Killer, but also a lot of these things were not widely discussed, and the internet was in its infancy in 1997. Now, this guy who had called into the Howard Stern show and said he was a serial killer, he may have had some Zodiac knowledge, but the stuff about the comic book connection, you really only get into that if you look deep into the Zodiac Killer mystery. When I saw my first Zodiac Killer documentaries, they weren't talking about the comic books at all. Yes, the Zodiac Killer was heavily inspired by comic books, particularly Tim Holt. I mean, a lot of similar imagery and wordplay used from that, as well as the Red Rider comics. And this guy on the who called into the Stern show had so many similarities. He said that a direct fantasy that he had came from comic books. He said he wanted to create his own serial killer signature. He said that he wanted to mail in the taunting letters and clues. And one thing, though, that needs to be discussed is that that happens a lot more frequently than people think. Now, you might be thinking about, okay, well, who's a serial killer that mails in letters? Well, the Zodiac Killer did, and Jack the Ripper did, but also the Son of Sam. I mean, that is just a very clear and deranged case of writing letters. You read David Berkowitz's letters, and they are way, way more mentally disorganized than the Zodiac's. And, I mean, you also have the Black Dahlia Avenger mailing in letters. But, I mean, some people might not think the Black Dahlia Avenger was a serial killer, but Steve Hodel definitely does, who accuses his own father, George Hodel, of being the Black Dahlia Avenger. And you also have serial killers like Maury Travis, the St. Louis video killer, and he got caught because he included a map from the internet, and they were able to look at the web address that had been attached to that. In the digital age, in the electronic age, in the age of computers and internet, there are so many other ways to catch a killer. And you just have to wonder, though, about the Zodiac mystery or Jack the Ripper. Would these crimes have been solved more easily if we lived in an age where everybody had home computers? Would the Zodiac not have been tempted to write an email or something? Or how about BTK, Dennis Rader? Some people just say that, yeah, Dennis Rader got busted because of a floppy disk or something like that. But, I mean, he's another example of a serial killer who created codes and, like, little twisted ciphers. But with Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac, BTK, the Son of Sam, they all gave themselves their own nickname. They definitely wanted to have some type of image that they were trying to create for the general public. And there's a lot of those influences in that call on the Howard Stern show from Clay the serial killer. I mean, I don't think he was the Storyville Slayer, but instead, there's also this possibility that that somebody, well, let's say hypothetically, if he were a real serial killer, he contemplated doing all of those things, writing the letters, taunting the media, and mailing in things with a signature. It's just that. He wanted to increase the taunting levels, but he decided not to instead. Just called the Howard Stern Show. Now, Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com used to work for Howard Stern, and he was a guest on the program. He worked for the Howard Stern West Coast office, I believe. But yeah, he actually plays his video. There's a video on his YouTube channel where he plays his call to the Howard Stern Show, where he's a guest via the phone. And I mean, I just had to ask him in the comment section here on YouTube, do you think that was a real call or not? And he said it was probably a hoax. So, I mean, lots of comments from you guys on both sides of the aisle. So I do appreciate that. And of course, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. And a great way to support this show and all of these efforts and continuing these discussions is to go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help this program. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And to continue with some other true crime talk, there was a particular video clip that I was looking for from the Howard Stern show where they were talking about a guy they called the Cleveland Rapist. And there was this person who was, well, I believe they said they were zoning in on him and he committed suicide. Again, I was trying to find the clip and I couldn't find the exact video clip online. But they said the Cleveland Rapist was a big fan of the Howard Stern show and kept very detailed notes about Howard Stern, like down to the wire. Okay, Howard Stern's talking about O.J. Simpson at this time. And he also wrote in his journal, I stayed up all night reading Robin Quivers' his book. Robin Quivers, of course, the co-host of the Stern show. And he wrote these very, very well-organized notations about how he was a fan of Howard Stern, and it's possible he actually went to a book signing in Cleveland and met Robin Quivers, and I couldn't find the exact piece online, so I got on Google and I found that there was this thread on Reddit that was saying it's also possible that that was a hoax, because I was like, okay, well, if I can't find the video clip from the Stern show, why don't I just pull up something about the Cleveland Rapist? And there are definitely stories like that from Cleveland, but the exact one about being a diehard Stern fan, no, I couldn't find anything at all. And someone says that might have been a hoax as well. And I would really hope that something like the Howard Stern show would not actually organize these things. I mean, they could just be like, that caller could have just been a prankster who had no connection to the show at all. But, I mean, Howard and Robin were just reading off this stuff in the past about the Cleveland Rapist, and I mean, that's just obstruction of justice at a certain point if you're going to actually fabricate something for a radio show. I mean, I don't think anyone in the world would accept it if I made up a fictional serial killer for Black Box Online Radio and I started doing a 10-part series on, let's see, what we call them, the West Virginia Slasher or something like that, and it's all fake. I don't think anyone in the world would accept that. I wouldn't even accept that, and I'm not going to do something like that, of course, but there are people out there who make stuff up for larger levels of media because they only care about ratings at a certain point. Now, I'm not saying that the Stern Show did, but someone else wrote that out in a thread, and I just thought it was really weird that that there was absolutely nothing on this criminal whom had kept these like organized notes about the Stern Show. But to talk about some of the other cases that have been shared on Black Box Online Radio, I did an episode recently on the YouTube Shorts page. It was about Michael Campbell, who is a heavily tattooed criminal, and it started out because back in 2012, I did an episode about, well, not an episode, I was a writer for an entertainment site, and I did an episode about tattoos with celebrities, and there was one person that I included on that website who was not a celebrity, and his name was Michael Campbell, and he just had this meme that was shared very frequently that had said, talking about his transformation from just being a criminal to being a heavily tattooed criminal. And about 5 years ago, some way, somehow, I started reading up about his case, and it actually turns into a very dark story. He's not just some small-time criminal who got a bunch of far-out face tattoos. He was a sex offender, and he was convicted for his first crime in 1995. And the reason why I'm talking to you about this now is I made a rather big error on the YouTube short. I mean, I don't know why I would have said this, that he was convicted in 1994. He was convicted in 1995 for sexual assault in the first degree. And on the YouTube short, I mean, maybe I said 1995. That's when it happened. No, I said he was convicted of attempted rape in 1994. No, that is just a mistake on my part, and I mean, I edited that video, and I don't know how I would have done that, so just putting out the correction now. And what happened was he attempted to rape a 14-year-old girl, and attempted rape, but that's still classified as sexual assault in the first degree, and, he was sent to prison, and then in 2021, he was doing the same thing again, attempted rape. He actually broke into a woman's house, and the woman was in bed with her boyfriend, and he tried to rape her while her boyfriend was in the same bed as was them. And of course, the boyfriend woke up and then chased him out, and then Michael Campbell had to flee on a bicycle, of all things, with all of his tattoo imagery. Yeah, you're not going to forget that guy. I mean, I wonder if he had been wearing a mask or something. So then, I mean, he is facing life in prison for that one, and I honestly think that if he's convicted and found guilty, which most likely he will be, he should get life in prison, because it's not only these two these two sexual assaults, these two cases of attempted rape. He has also been arrested for theft multiple times, and also he was arrested for being within 500 feet of a playground or public pool, because, as I said, in 1995, he was convicted for being a sex offender, and he is not supposed to be around children or any place children would frequent. So that, as I said, it takes a very dark turn. With some of his tattoo imagery, though, one thing that people often overlook is on the side, he has the number 88, and everyone zones in, of course, on the pentacle. The number 88 is a white power symbol because the 8th letter of the alphabet is H, and 88 means HH, it means Heil Hitler. And I did one episode about that in the older Black Box days. There's some twisted conspiracy theory involving the 8th of August, like the 8th month and the 8th day. So that, I talk about the 88 conspiracy theory in an older Black Box recording. But speaking of those, I did an episode in 2019 about Wallace Farad Muhammad, and he was the founder of the Nation of Islam. And I was talking about him, calling him Wallace Fard, and I actually said something about him on last week's Ripper Wednesday, and one of you guys in the comments section heard an episode with me from the channel Byron Resume. Yes, Byron Resume. And it talked about the origins of Wallace Farad. Firstly, his name was Wallace Fard. At some point in his life, he decided to change the pronunciation of his name to Wallace Farad. And I first began reading about him back in 2014, and there were all of these wild stories talking about how there was this man who came to Detroit, Michigan, and founded the Nation of Islam, and maybe he was born in Saudi Arabia, maybe he was born in Afghanistan, maybe he was born in New Zealand, maybe he was born in Portland, Oregon, and there are all of these things. I was like, what's going on? Okay, I'll tell you what's going on. He lied. He was a con man, and he told a bunch of wild stories. And the channel Byron Resume actually found out his actual origin by going through old census records, that he was born in Texas, and that he was not an Afghani, he was not an Arab from the land of Mecca, he was not half British, half Polynesian, born on a sailor's ship heading to America and docking in Portland, Oregon. He was just a guy from Texas. He was of mulatto ancestry, part black, part indigenous or Latino, as we would say. And in the episode on Byron Resume, they didn't say exactly how his ancestry would have played out. Like, I think they gathered that his parents were also mulatto, and I wish I had a better way of putting it than that, but they were also of mixed ancestry, and he just had this unusual appearance. By that, I mean that when he would try and interact with people, he would pass himself off as an Arab at some times or an Afghani because people thought that he was of a different origin. Now, this is not even true crime related, but I just have to talk to you guys about this because one thing that this channel Byron Resume was trying to do to dispel any of these theories about Wallace Farad, excuse me. I mean, Wallace Fard was his name. He made up the pronunciation. He said, though, that you should discount all of those theories that he was from Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia because he never once had a foreign accent. If he had arrived as an adult or even as a teenager to America, he would have had a foreign accent if he's from another country. And that's just simply not fair. I mean, you must have met somebody who learned the English language and developed a North American accent or a British accent. I mean, I've met people in my personal life who started learning a language in their teen years or in their 20s, and they have the ability to learn a native accent. It doesn't happen super frequently, but it does happen from time to time. I mean, there are a handful of instances. And no, I wouldn't just say, like, say, for example, you meet somebody and they're like, oh, yeah, well, I mean, I lived in Hong Kong until I was 15 and then I moved to America. Ah, but you don't have a Hong Kongese accent, therefore you couldn't possibly be from Hong Kong. No, I mean, that happens all the time. Some people just are able to master the pronunciation. I cannot do that. Like, whenever I've tried to learn another language, I sound like a West Virginian or something. I mean, I went to French class in high school, and then people tell me now, oh, you sound like you're from Quebec. And I'm like, no, I don't. If I were to ever try to say anything in French, which sounds like a garbage disposal if I do it, I sound like I'm from West Virginia. I don't sound like anyone from Quebec. Mais oui, j'aime West Virginia. Yeah, exactly like that. I did a recent episode for the Anything Goes Friday segment talking about the satanic cults and movements that could have possibly infiltrated some of the true crime cases in California, and the ones that I had been talking about were mostly the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia case, as well as the Manson family. With the Black Dahlia case, I mean, I actually even misspoke there because with the Black Dahlia story involving suspect George Hodel, who's previously mentioned in this episode, it was that it's not to say that he was satanic. It's that he was very into surrealist art, and that there is an overlap between surrealist art and Satanism that the CIA uses when they're trying to commit crimes and then blame them on these occult groups. And I talked about it in the episode going through everything, but there's a comment that came in from It Doesn't Matter saying, honestly, this is just stupid. George Hodel wasn't arrested because he paid off the police. The son of Sam, David Berkowitz, was just a regular killer trying to claim the old insanity defense. The Zodiac Killer was most likely a loner who hated couples and was obsessed with crime, both real and fictional. None of their crimes had anything to do with politics or religion. Talking about any type of satanic connection. Okay, firstly, I mostly agree with you, person who has the name It Doesn't Matter. Doesn't matter what your name is, so said The Rock. But one thing on BlackBoxOnlineRadio that this channel has actually done is I've taken a lot of true crime theories and organized them, and that might not be the greatest service to the world, but with the Zodiac Killer mystery in particular, as well as the other cases that have been discussed, yes, I mean, I've actually been able to assemble these different observations that people have, or just even the theoretical claims that people have had. And that episode was an example of that. The Satanic Movements of California, that was the one that I did in 2020. This episode was called The Satanic Side of California, excuse me. But yes, I did an old Black Box recording with the previous title 3 years ago. And no, I don't necessarily endorse any of those claims myself. It's just a lot of people are coming to that same conclusion, and I just simply laid it all out there. And the thing about David Berkowitz and the son of Sam, that has mostly been shared through Maury Terry, and he was the author of The Ultimate Evil, who believed in a type of connection between the son of Sam in New York and the Manson family in California, and that there's this nationwide homicidal movement where people are in this type of murderous cult-like organization, and that's the nutshell version. Very, very large and expanding theory that Maury Terry had. But with the Zodiac Killer, I think there's very little evidence that the Zodiac Killer actually was satanic. The only thing that seemed mildly convincing was that there was a cross that was used by Aleister Crowley that Maury Terry actually featured online, saying that this symbol was meant for a killer, meant for someone to be invisible to their enemies, and that's why the Zodiac was wearing the symbol at Lake Berryessa. But as a response to that episode, Stefan, who requested today's topic, has something that he wanted to share about Aleister Crowley, and he says, I strongly disagree with the belief pushed by people who watch too many YouTube videos and conspiracy documentaries thinking that Aleister Crowley was a Satanist. He was an eccentric occultist and poet, and he of course rebelled against his parents, who were heavily invested in a fundamentalist Christian movement called the Plymouth Brethren, but he was not a Satanist. In fact, if you start reading Aleister Crowley's works, you will be aware that he takes a very strong stance against black magic and what he labeled the Black Brothers, occultists who practiced black magic. The whole notion of Crowley being satanic was born out of the so-called satanic panic, and conspiracy theories connected that to a moral panic. Yes, much of Crowley's dogma involves realizing your own potential by working towards your own true will, which in essence means to let go of your mundane egoistic desires and elevate your consciousness towards spiritual enlightenment. Also, it must be pointed out that occultism is not equal to Satanism. And Stefan, thank you so much for that comment there, and I definitely would like to go through some of the some more things about Aleister Crowley. I mean, I know I've been saying that for a long time, that I wanted to do a bigger presentation on him, as well as on Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. Now, Anton LaVey, okay, definitely seems like he is promoting something that is satanic, but he's also not completely about worshiping the guy who has the red face and the devil horns and the pitchfork. No, not like that, but the worship of self, as well as the giving into the ego. And then this is why I had to talk about the Black Dahlia in that particular episode, because it's also about the recognition that there is this Luciferian connection to surrealist art, and Luciferianism meaning that you liberate humanity by destroying it, and surrealist art dealing with the states of being, the same way that the creation story of Genesis is supposed to deal with the states of being, that when Eve is tempted with the apple, it's actually Jesus and Lucifer, as well as the snake itself. It's those three entities, those three states of being are all involved with that. And I mean, again, I don't believe this stuff myself, but other people have shared this information, and I'm evaluating it. And in some ways, I have been able to put a lot of those theories in order. And when we look at the story of the Zodiac Killer, absolutely, I think everybody would agree with this, that the Zodiac, the Manson family, and the Black Dahlia case all are now intertwined, particularly the Zodiac and the Manson family, because they all happened in California, and there's such a strong set of theories that have been written out. I mean, the Zodiac Manson connection, Bill Nelson's book Manson as well talks about this, and also how about Steve Hodel and the Black Dahlia Zodiac connection? And it's not only him, because Edward Wayne Edwards is also been accused of being the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer. Jack Torrance has been accused of being the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia Avenger. And these types of theories are so widely discussed that there turns into this type of belief system in its own way that's just dealing with all of these interconnections between famous true crime cases throughout the world, definitely throughout the world. I just pulled up California because that's mostly the area that I end up exploring, coming from West Virginia, and exploring California virtually, blending states of being all the same. But if you guys have any other questions and comments about the Zodiac Killer and these other cases that have been talked about, the Black Dahlia Avenger, Michael Campbell, Wallace Farad, the son of Sam, you can write your ideas out in the comments section down below. I would love to read your messages. And again, if you have an idea for a future episode, you can share anything you want. And with True Crime Talk Radio, I'm definitely going to start doing some more of these episodes. But in the future, I will, again, arrange it more by theme. And what I'm actually thinking about doing for the channel is adding in a segment that is just going to be about serial killers. One of the days of the week will be something like a Serial Killer Thursday, but it's not going to have that name. No, absolutely not, because that would just I just don't like the sound of that. But I mean, you can talk about different aspects that you can see, because one thing that I found that Black Box Online Radio does that is quite different than a lot of other YouTube channels is, say, for example, start by talking about the Zodiac Killer. Be like, okay, well, this other serial killer has also experienced these types of behaviors, and there's a little bit of that, but not as in depth. And I mean, I would definitely want to do that, like showing the comparisons and contrast between these different elements of human psychology that drive people to commit these types of crimes. And I would definitely, I'm planning on doing something like that in the near future. So please stay tuned. You hit the like button, subscribe, follow along with these true crime discussions. Please feel free to visit any of the links in the description box. And that's all for me now. And I will see you over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.